Hello and welcome to another episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. Are you feeling like you just don't know how to make good choices? Everything seems so urgent and so important, and you are just constantly firefighting. Well, we are joined today by Kat Brown. Thanks for joining us today, Kat. And we're gonna dive straight in because Kat has been a teacher and a SENCO and has an awful lot of experience also as a coach. So, Kat, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my background is very much in primary school education, specialising in special educational needs and inclusion. And I went through my BEd undergrad and Masters in Education and Inclusion, specialising in global sustainable education practices. But I have since then retrained as an ILM Level 7 executive coach and mentor. And because I could never leave education fully, I now work with SENCOs and head teachers in a coaching and consulting capacity.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on today. Can you tell us what would be your first top tip for teachers, leaders, SENCOs?
I think my biggest top tip would be takes you away from the firefighting, will allow you to be able to deal with those really high stress or urgent situations when they do occur to the best of your ability, allowing you to have the energy to enjoy the teaching or the SENCO or whichever role in the school you fulfill.
Wow, I love that word enjoy, because a lot of teachers, SENCOs, leaders, they say to me at the moment, the joy of the job has gone. I am just constantly firefighting. So how do they do that?
I think for me, in reality, that's making sure that you've done your due diligence, your planning and your preparation so that you can be present in the moment and you can be proactive rather than reactive. So an example of that would be as a SENCO, or in fact as a teacher who's adding to the EHCP review process, you know every year you're going to have those meetings that you have to hold and you have to get the pupil voice and parent voice feedback before the meeting happens. So if you set up your timeline so that you even pre-set up emails to send before the meeting happens, you can have done all of those things. And if something comes up, there's a really urgent safeguarding risk or something that comes up, I don't know, school play, something the same week as the EHCP review, then you can step away from it and you can go and focus with the whole of your attention and your positive energy on the important thing that is urgent, and then your important but less urgent item can still happen in its own time.
Wow, I love that. So actually it is about being very proactive and planning far ahead, even for the year.
Yes. So
okay.
As a SENCO myself, I always had a big wall calendar that was set up as a rolling year calendar. So I'd always planned out as far ahead as I could. All of the things that I knew had to happen in a certain month were on that calendar. And then once I'd gone through and things get a bit more finite in their details, I could put in the individual date, not just the month, which allowed me to have a much bigger picture view, as well as planning sort of what I was doing on a day-to-day or weekly basis.
Brilliant. It's so obvious, isn't it? But actually it's great. And I suppose that one of the things I now do, I have a life planner. And so I'll put that report, that meeting in, but I'll also put in the 2 hours before the meeting to prep it and the 3 hours to write the report after the meeting. And I'll time block it out of my diary. And I think that SENCOs and teachers who have that ability to time block, to be more organised, they certainly report that they do, a level of stress is taken off at least.
Yes.
Not all of it. We'll come back to the enjoyment perhaps in a minute. What other things would you, because you said to me before we came on air, you said you can only be pushed as far as you let people push you. Tell me about that.
It's one of the things that is very pertinent to SEN, I think, and being aware of your emotional responses, your triggers and your boundaries. As a teacher or any member of staff in a school, there will be things that you have to do, but there are also clear expectations on what is your responsibility as opposed to the child's or the parents' or somebody else's responsibility. But if you let people push you outside of the things that are your responsibility, it can become very difficult to manage because you then have too many things on your plate or too many things that you're trying to juggle. And actually, if you don't let them push you outside of those boundaries and you're really clear and crystalline about the things that you can and can't do, and you're open and honest in how you communicate that, then it's much easier to say to somebody who suggests they want you to do something that's outside of those, for you to say, no, actually, look, I'm not the appropriate person, or this isn't the appropriate time. And you don't even have to offer a solution or another way for them to deal with it, because you have been really clear from the beginning on what you expect and what your boundaries are.
Wow. Can you give us an example of a school situation where you have been able to say no to something? Because what teachers say to me, and this was certainly one of my issues and one of the reasons I burnt out, I couldn't say no to anybody for anything. And I loved my job and I loved the impact I had, but I suppose because I was a people pleaser and didn't have boundaries, saying no was really tough.
Thinking back on when I was a SENCO, I think the easiest way for me to do that was to have really clear boundaries on when I was able to cover lessons, because I had some teaching responsibility as well as my SEN leadership role, then being really clear about when I couldn't be asked to go into a class, and making it clear that even if I didn't have a meeting, there were specific things I could be disturbed if there was, say, a safeguarding risk or something I had to go and deal with. But for just covering a teacher because they were ill, they had to get supply in and they couldn't come and get me. And because I made that clear from the beginning, and in fact, in one case, had it written into my contract what those timings were, or what the hours that I could be asked to go and cover lessons were, I was able to just say, I can't do that. But it also meant that if there was a one-off and I felt that I wanted or had the time to offer to do something that I wouldn't normally do, it was appreciated that much more.
Wow. So are you basically saying that you went to your head and you said, look, I've got 2.5 days as a SENCO here, 2.5 days as a class teacher. On my 2.5 days SENCO, I can't be pulled to cover classes unless it's an emergency, obviously, where we all step in. But, because I need that time, are you agreeing with that? So you had that discussion.
Yes, absolutely. As part of my sort of annual appraisal and developmental review process, I made sure that it was really clear what my expectations were and what it needed to look like, so that actually the pupils and other staff could have their needs met and everybody could have the best possible outcomes. Because actually, if you take me away from doing the meeting preparation and the planning and going through EHCPs or running interventions with a child, then actually those things don't happen as they need to. And then we get ourselves in a pickle, because actually the important things that didn't seem urgent got missed, and you dealt with some urgent things that might actually not have been that important if you'd had that chance to step back and be able to refocus.
Wow. So I really hope there are some school staff here who are listening and thinking, is this my responsibility, what I'm being asked for? But I would also say to them, is what you're being asked to in your value set? Because if you know your values and what you're being requested to do is outside of that, it's going to sit very uncomfortably with you. And in my experience, that is also one of the reasons that we get very stressed and burnt out, because we're not sitting and working in alignment with our values. Yeah. Okay, so Kat, go on to another top tip you've got.
I think it's about knowing what's in your zone of power and what isn't. So for me, it was really important with those boundaries to know that I can't control the weather. So if there is going to be a wet break or something that happens every day in schools, then I can't control that. But there are things that are in my zone of power that I can do in order to be prepared for that. Which goes back to that sort of planning and organisation point.
Okay, so talk a bit more about your zone of power, because I'm thinking about decisions and choices. I mean, I think teachers make something like 1,500 decisions a day. Where does that sit with the zone of power?
So in terms of the decisions that we make, there are things you can control and things you can't control. I am responsibility for the actions that I take in any given moment. But actually, whilst I have a duty of care and I am there as a teacher working with the students, they have their own zone of responsibility, their power over the things that they do autonomously. And as a teacher, I shouldn't be trying to control that. So actually, in a classroom, if you can be in a state of making decisions about the things that you can control and not worrying about things you can't control, whether it's the weather or something else going on, then you can focus and be present in the moment.
Wow. So how, if, it's a rainy, wet day and you've got 2 teaching assistants off and, the children are all struggling that day particularly, how do you manage to be your best self within that?
I think for me, it came back to being aware of my own emotional intelligence and using other things that were at my disposal, such as coaching conversations and PQ reps, in order to make sure that I was able to self-regulate and go from my saboteur initial response to something that might be happening in front of me, taking it back a step, doing those PQ reps to refocus, recenter, and realign, and then responding from a sage perspective so that I could be present and listening actively and making sure that I had heard whatever the situation was from the other person or people involved.
Can you tell listeners who don't know about the PQ rep?
So it's based on positive intelligence, and I always get his name wrong, Shirzad Charmaine, who has set up a program which is accessible to coaches and to other individuals called the PQ program. And it's all about having the forethought to focus on the things that allow your brain to re-regulate. So in terms of teaching an SEN, we're all very familiar with taking brain breaks or doing something physical to relieve stress in order to then refocus on the learning. And PQ reps are exactly the same. You focus on something that is physical for a short burst, just 10 seconds for sort of one rep, and then you are then able to focus on the task at hand.
Okay, so if you're feeling quite dysregulated, you're having a really bad day in school, as a leader, teacher, SENCO, describe what a PQ rep might look like for you.
So a PQ rep is really brilliant because it can be done as something that you do as a group, or it could be done as something that you do personally. So as a group, it might look like tapping as many different places on your body and feeling those sensations, or tightening and relaxing muscles in order to release that tension. Or if you're having a difficult conversation, for example, as many teachers have to do either with other members of staff or parents, it could be as simple as focusing on a particular breathing pattern or rubbing together each of your fingertips, just to bring your focus really onto that tactile sensation of the ridges of one fingertip against the other.
Wow, I love that. And actually, we had Rachel Kobiecki on here recently, and she talked about the sensory value of things like rings, and she sort of can rub a ring or a jumper or something. And I guess that's the same sort of idea. Wow, Kat, that's an awful lot in a very short amount of time. If people want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they find you?
I think the best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn, either by searching Kat Brown or by searching Caesar Coaching Appraising Training Services Ltd.
Okay, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I think your experience is, a lot of people will resonate with a lot of your input. So I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com, or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.